Hello, I am joined today by Ira of SF Words of Wonder. Welcome, Ira.
Thanks for having me, Robin.
It's a pleasure. So, we are here today at Ira's suggestion to discuss a book which we both decided to read for spooky season, I guess you could say, because it's a horror book, and that is James Herbert's The Rats. This is my copy. I think we both have vintage copies.
Yeah, this is I I ended up getting this at a used bookstore. Uh, I'd heard of it, and I got it home, started looking at it, and it looks like it's a first edition from the U.S.
Right, so mine is New English Library. It's not first edition. I think this one's 1980, but I do like the cover art on this one.
Yeah.
And we've got a portrait of the author on the back,
Oh, okay.
looking very much of the time, I think. um, so yeah, I mean, I chose this book because it's been on my mind for quite a while as kind of a classic sort of creature feature pulp horror novel from the 70s. It's quite well known within that sort of genre. But I'm curious, what made you choose this book?
I not too long ago read Dance Macabre by Stephen King, and he kind of breaks down the horror genre in print and TV and movies and all over the place. And if you're into reading horror or any of that, but I'm mostly interested in the reading side of it, he gives all kinds of recommendations from the classics like H.P. Lovecraft and all these people. But he talked quite a bit about James Herbert, and he kind of talks about how this was some of the original real pulp gruesome horror, but he really talked him up too. Like there was more to offer than just that, and he felt like he was kind of misrepresented by putting in that kind of ideal. So I had been kind of on the lookout, and I've found three of his books in the wild, and knowing this is one of his most popular ones, I was like, I think I'm going to read that for this spooky season.
Yeah, I would say it's probably his magnum opus. I think it was his. I think it was his debut novel. So, for a bit of context, this book came out in 1974. James Herbert was a British author. I think he died a few years ago. And The Rats made quite a big impact for its time.
I can imagine.
Yeah, um, and in fact, it started. Well, it kind of sparked off a whole craze in the 70s and 80s for kind of pulp horror fiction with animals on the rampage as a theme. And um, just to illustrate this point, I'm reading another book in this category called The Cats. That's another one of my Halloween reads. And it says at the top, in the tradition of the rats. So it's quite explicit about, its inspiration. And I think there are loads of other books like that from around that time.
Oh yeah, and this came out right before King really launched the whole genre a bit, and he's written plenty about animals. There's Pet Cemetery and Cujo and many
Absolutely.
others. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay. So let's talk a little about a bit about the premise of this novel and the way it's written. Um, Ira, do you want to give it a shot? How would you describe this book? What is it about?
Well, it's obviously about some killer mutant rats taking over London, and I mean that's kind of the basic premise. It definitely gets into more things than that, but and it's pretty obvious from looking at it and knowing kind of what genre this is in, what you're going to get. But I would say the writing style was quite a bit different, and I kind of liked it. There was kind of chapters thrown in just to give you context of what he was trying to paint of London, and this kind of this darkness that was kind of shrouding London in certain areas, and mostly because of certain people. And it was kind of this lower class that was kind of mostly taking the brunt of this attack of rats.
Certainly, yeah. So it's basically it's East London, the East End of London, which gets infected with. Initially, it's just a small group of these mutant rats, right? But it ends up becoming a bit of a plague on the city. And as you say, the mutants, they're kind of giant killer rats that they attack people, basically, en masse. And you wouldn't think that a rat could do much damage to a human being, but they are vicious. They claw like, and bite their victims to death, and there are some very grisly and gruesome death scenes in this novel.
Yeah, and they get up to about 2 feet. They're jumping at people, and if you're bitten, you have about 24 hours to live. That's kind of pretty early on in the book. So even if you just get bit and you can manage to get away from these things, it's pretty much a death sentence.
That's true, isn't it? Yeah, that's another thing. The victims get infected with some kind of disease, which, as you said, is pretty much always fatal. And as you've kind of mentioned already, it's got quite an interesting structure, this novel. So on the one hand, we've got a protagonist. His name is Harris, and he's an art teacher. An unlikely hero, but he ends up being the central character, and he plays quite an important role in working with the authorities to find a solution to this rat infestation and what to do about them. But I would say his story is only really half of the novel, because the whole structure of the book is interspersed with lots of standalone chapters, you could say, where we get introduced to a character, a one-off character. We learn a little bit about them, and then they suffer some gruesome death, usually at the end of the chapter, at the hands of the rats. So what did you think of this whole structure?
You know, at first I was kind of thrown off by it, because pretty early on, you get one of these. It's actually like the first chapter, and you're thinking, is this going to be our main character? And then, I mean, not to spoil too much, I mean, this happens in the first chapter, but this person dies, and you get a lot of backstory about this person. And Herbert was definitely ahead, I think, of his time for these characters and what they were going through, and all kinds of their background and orientation and stuff. And so then you go into chapter 2 kind of thinking, is this person going to make it? And it kind of keeps you on your toes. You do kind of figure out that Harris is probably going to be in most of the book, but he'll throw you these little one-off chapters, and some of them are really gruesome. Some of the scenes here with some of these rats, and I mean, this is a full-on horror book. But yeah, that structure is something I don't think I've ever quite read, because it's not quite like a fix-up novel. There is still this kind of thread of a plot going through, but he's just throwing in these random chapters and characters. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. And of course, Harris has a kind of unique sort of position within the characters of the novel. He's an art teacher, but I think he's quite quick-witted, and one major advantage he has is that he's very familiar with the environs, the environment where these rats kind of fester, or where they originate from, this particular locale in East London, which apparently, if you've got local knowledge of the area, it's going to be an advantage, because most of the experts who come in, like the rat control people, the police, the government, they don't really know the area. It's a kind of working class area in East London, somewhere which they probably would never really touch normally, and so they feel out of their depth. But Harrison, he knows the area, and he knows not just where things are, but he kind of understands the problem in a bit more of a deeper way, I think, because it's not just simply these rats just appear out of nowhere. It's they are basically attracted to these kind of underprivileged areas, right? It's kind of a social commentary in a way, because you've got these slums in East London, you've got these neglected neighborhoods where rubbish is piling up, buildings which were destroyed during the war haven't been cleared away, and the sanitation is really awful. And of course, this is where vermin like to feed and breed and stuff. And so this becomes part of the sort of social commentary of the novel in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And there's more. Even when, like, at one point, Harris and his girlfriend go off, I think, to see her aunt, and they go to a different part of the city, and he's really annoyed by all the tourists and how things are like made out of plastic, and he's really kind of, wondering which direction the country is going. So there's all throughout the book, there's some of that commentary.
And what did you think about the violence? We've mentioned that there are quite a lot of gruesome death scenes throughout the whole book. Do you think it was? Do you think it's gratuitous?
Well, I can. Some of it was pretty absurd in a way, and you're kind of laughing a little bit, even though it's pretty gruesome. But there is some other parts, like even in the beginning, there's, I think, one of the first scenes, maybe the second gruesome scene, involves a baby and a dog, and that was pretty bad. And then throughout, you're kind of getting peppered with this throughout. And I've read some stuff like this. I know things have gotten even worse for kind of shock value. I haven't read anything I would call extreme, but I would say, for most people that have maybe read Stephen King and know that level of horror, I would put it around that. I wouldn't say it's any worse or any less than some of his kind of more gruesome novels.
Right, because I think at the time it was published, it was quite controversial.
I could imagine.
Yeah. But yeah,
especially for it to get very popular. I read somewhere that they made a print run and it sold out in weeks, and so this is kind of on the front end of this type of horror that was like really appealing to the masses in a way.
yeah. I mean, because the way I think of it, it is quite well. It's certainly horrific, and it does go hard on the violence and the gore. But I've read a few sort of pulpy horror novels before, and this one doesn't really feel as trashy as some of the other stuff, especially some of the derivatives. I feel like it's actually quite a well-written horror novel, and that the themes have a point to them. So I've mentioned the social commentary, and I think it goes beyond just this whole, the urban decline and neglect of the working class and stuff. But I think it's also quite critical of the establishment in some ways, because the way the authorities try to deal with the problem is inadequate. There's a lot of finger pointing. The locals blame the council for neglecting their area. The council blame the government for not giving them enough funding. And then the Conservatives, I think, who were the party in government at the time, blame the previous Labour administration. Labour blamed the Tories. And then one minister gets the chop because they have to have a scapegoat. And then they discreetly rehire him later because they still need him. It's just all for show. It's like everyone's saying, "Oh, it's his fault, it's their fault," because they don't know what to do, basically.
Yeah. The guy they pin it on, it was just for the public's consumption, and he's back behind the scenes running everything still. So it's kind of cynical, but probably fairly realistic too. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure if we really think about it, there's probably some analogs to, how COVID was dealt with at the start of that pandemic in this country and in other countries. Any kind of like mass event which is causing all kinds of social upheaval and people have never dealt with before, people are going to panic. They're going to blame the government. The government's going to blame other people. And I think it's quite realistic in a way. It's not just mindless horror. It's not just the rats come and kill everyone and that's it.
Which is what I kind of expected, But so that was kind of a level that I didn't quite see coming, and thought it made the novel a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, and I suppose technically, we both have science fiction channels. You could say technically this is sci-fi horror because these rats they have a scientifically explained origin, although it doesn't really go into much detail regarding this, which I was a little bit disappointed by because I would have liked to have learned more about how these rats came into being. Can you?
I know there's some sequels. I don't know if he gets into it in the sequels, but
no, but he kind of hints at it in this book that they have a foreign origin. I think there's some kind of mutant strain of rat that was born out of a radiation blast in some other part of the world, and then they get smuggled into England and bred illegally, and then they escape. I think that's, if I remember correctly, that's kind of the explanation. But really, it doesn't go into much detail at all.
Yeah, and like you said, with a little sci-fi twist, there's something going on with the way they think and act, and it's sort of like a hive mind. And you get some stuff at the end that's pretty interesting and gruesome that has to do with these rats. So, like one of the final scenes with Harris tracking down this missing guy. Pretty interesting.
That's true. We haven't really talked about like the behavior of the rats that much because it's not just simply they attack people, but they are intelligent, and we don't really know how intelligent, but they seem to be deeply intelligent. I still don't really know why they need to attack and kill people. Just I don't know where this bloodlust comes from. So yeah, I would like to learn more about. I think the sci-fi reader in me would like to know more about their origin. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I enjoyed this book actually. I think I've enjoyed it more than other pulp horror books, as I've suggested that I've read. What's your kind of overall opinion on the book?
Well, it was 200. My copy was just around 200 pages, and I mean, I flew through this in like 2 days, basically, and the structure, the kind of some of the mystery of what's going on, and then the scenes. It was you could just plow through this book, or I did. It was very entertaining the whole time. The gruesome bits weren't horrible, but definitely if you don't like some gruesome horror, then this probably isn't one for you. But overall, I enjoyed this one. I wouldn't say I have a lot of experience reading this kind of stuff. I do want to read more horror like from this era. I've read some older horror like H.P. Lovecraft and Arthur Machen and some of these writers who wrote mostly short stories. And then I've read a lot of Stephen King and a few other kind of more modern horror writers. But this is definitely piquing my interest. I have a few other books that I think fall into this 70s subgenre of horror. Hopefully they have a little bit more to them like this one does. And I have a couple other from Herbert that I'd like to read now.
Yeah, speaking of which, I think it does have quite a 70s feel. I think this book, and I would agree. I also plowed through it faster than I normally read a book. It's just like I said. I think it's not like it's a masterpiece of literature. I wouldn't put it like that. But I would say it's much better written than a lot of pulp horror, from that time, and a few of the derivatives which I've read, like Guyan Smith, are just nowhere near as well written. And I think it was the other thing I like about it is consistently entertaining. It may not be highbrow literature, but it is entertaining, and in some ways it's quite thought provoking, like I've suggested.
Yeah, and I
Sorry.
will say that if I had to pick out some cons in this one, like in 200 pages and the way it bounces around, you don't get a lot of deep character study, and even the premise of having an art teacher almost like being at the head of this assault against the rats seems a little silly.
It is a bit absurd.
But I was just in it for the ride, and Herbert at least made an attempt to reason why Harris was being used in this fashion, and he just didn't throw him in there without an explanation. Like you said, he was in this area, and he was one of the first people around when a child got bitten, one of his students, and so Herbert made an attempt to reason why the guy was there, but it does seem a little absurd.
Yeah, I think perhaps negative of this book is a minor point, but I think some of the language is quite dated, which might be considered offensive by today's standards. So you've got like the odd outdated racist term, or misogyny, which may not have been controversial at the time, but don't really read so well today. So that's another reason why it's got quite a 70s feel to it. I remember, for example, when like one of the early chapters when he's describing his colleagues, Harris's colleagues. I think it was Harris. Maybe no, sorry, one of the other minor characters, and they describe his female colleague as the office spinster.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is not the kind of thing you really hear people say today.
Yeah.
So yeah, a little bit dated, but it's entertaining. I also would be very interested to read the sequels.
Mm-hmm.
So there are three sequels. The second book is called Lair, and a quick look on Wikipedia tells me it's set in the English countryside, so they move away from the city in that book. That's all I know. And then that's followed by Domain, which is set further into the future, and that could be interesting because it's described as post-apocalyptic, and there's some kind of nuclear fallout. So maybe that might appeal to you or me because it sounds like it's leaning more on the sci-fi post-apocalyptic sort of vibe.
Yeah.
And then in the last book came out in '94. It's called The City, and that's actually a graphic novel. So he went down a different path for that one. I would definitely be up for if I don't know if I'll go out of my way to read them, but if I see them out in the wild, I'll definitely pick them up.
Same here. If I have three of his books, but I'm on the hunt now. If I see his works out in the wild for a decent deal, because sometimes people are charging a lot for these vintage horror books, but the ones I got were only a couple bucks, so I'm definitely going to be looking for more of his works. And the sequels sound interesting too. The third book sounds almost like a more science fiction if it's set in the future, post-apocalyptic.
Yes, but I'm guessing the rats still play an important role. Maybe by that point there'll be more rats than humans in the future society. Have to read it and find out. I don't know anything about his other books, though. I don't know if you've... Which of his other James Herbert books do you have?
Let's see here. Let me grab them real quick.
Okay.
I have The Dark, which has an interesting cover, and Fluke, which has a dog there.
Okay. I don't know what those are about, but one trend I have noticed is that almost all of his novels are just one-word titles.
Yeah. Yes, I've noticed that. And I think one of his other most famous ones is called The Fog.
Okay.
And I think that was it might have been his second book or something. And I was looking, after reading The Rats and really enjoying it, I looked him up on Goodreads, and it seemed like The Fog was one of his other most well-known ones. And so I was looking around for copies, but they tend to go for a little bit of money, so I'm going to have to try to find that one maybe at the bookstore.
And another thing I learned, I think this was from Wikipedia, The Rats, I'm going to have to double check this, make sure I've got this right, but I believe it's been adapted into a movie twice.
Yeah.
I can't remember when. I think the first one came out in the 80s. It didn't get very good reviews. It doesn't take place in London. I forget which city. I think it's in North America somewhere. And then that film itself was remade later, but I don't remember either of those films getting very good reviews.
I would imagine back then trying to make those rats look realistic, a 2-foot long rat attacking people could have been kind of silly looking, but with today's technology, they could really make a gruesome movie out of this, especially if they followed some of these scenes. Like there was a scene in a subway, and when they were running around the school, some of that was like some really good suspenseful, well-written horror, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I haven't even mentioned that. It takes place over quite a variety of different settings in London. And yeah, you mentioned the subway. I think one of my favourite scenes was in the cinema, actually.
Oh yeah.
And it's described in a very vivid way. the way like the everything is dark apart from the the film on the projector, so which kind of adds to the tension and the atmosphere. And then the people start feeling things scuttling about under their seats, and then as soon as people realize what's happening, there's a kind of mad rush for the exit, and it all turns into chaos, and you can't really see what's going on because there's no light, and it sounds absolutely terrifying. Which is, I think, the underground scene, the subway train, also shares that kind of horror, right? Because you're underground, there's no easy
Yeah,
escape, and yeah,
you're kind of claustrophobic in this place with no escape or only one exit, and yeah, it definitely added to the suspense and tension.
yeah. So I think we've about covered it. I enjoyed this book,
Yeah,
perhaps more than I was expecting. Well, when I did my TBR video for this month, I put it down as a maybe because I wasn't certain if I was going to read it or not. It was kind of on the maybe pile. And then when Ira commented on my video saying we should do a buddy read, and I thought, okay, I'm definitely going to read it now. So I appreciate that, and I think it's all the more fun that we are able to discuss it afterwards.
yeah, definitely something different to throw in, and for being such a fast, easy read, I just had fun with it, and I'm glad I read it. So it's good coincidence we both threw it on our TBR.
All right. Well, and I don't know if you've got any other comments you'd like to add, or shall we wrap it up there?
I think we about covered everything. Yeah.
Okay. So if you're watching this and you haven't already subscribed to Ira's channel, I don't know what you're waiting for. So I'll link his channel in the description. Please do check it out. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.
And thank you, Robin. It was fun.
Thank you.